Blaming others for anything in which blacks lag has become standard operating procedure among white liberals.
Uh-oh, they're catering to the inherited victim mentality by teaching blacks that their current failures are not their fault and that it's out of their control. And so when you continuously blame people, you remain in a hopeless position, right? And you're always at the mercy of the actions of other people. And so in other words, you remain a slave.
If blacks do not pass bar exams or medical board tests as often as whites or Asians, then that shows that something is wrong with those tests as far as many white liberals are concerned.
They make it seem as something is wrong with the test and that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the test taker. And so this is not a worldview that you want to allow anyone to instill in your children if you want them to be competitive in the real world.
Best-selling author Andrew Hacker, for example, says that academic problems in general are created for black students in white colleges because such colleges use curricula that are white in logic and learning, in their conceptions of scholarly knowledge and demeanor.
White logic and learning, meaning having to solve problems using a lot of brain resources and actually having to put effort into thinking about how to solve a problem in areas that may be of little interest. And so if this is white logic and learning, then what must be black logic and learning?
Why this does not seem to be a problem for Asian students remains unexplained, even though blacks have lived in this white society for centuries longer than either Asian Americans or contemporary immigrants from Asia.
It's not a problem for the Asian American students because they have a culture that actually values education, right? And education in especially technical and challenging subjects. And so I remember in high school, I had a friend named Nico who was in the Asian American community, and he used to come and break dance with us in the after school program. But after a certain amount of time would pass, he would say that he had to leave and go home to go study, right? And this was like in the 11th grade, and I think he was in AP pre-calculus or either AP calculus. But he was a top performer in all of his studies in school. But when it was time for us to leave the after school program, we didn't go home and study, right? We went home and then either went to the park to play basketball or go inside to play video games, right? And then the results they showed, right? Because he got good grades in school, and most of us who had identified ourselves as black people, we got good at playing basketball and playing video games, right? So there's no secret or there's no mystery to how this happened, right? It's obvious when we look at it, and we all know this.
Why it is not a problem for blacks from the Caribbean is another unexplained contradiction of such white liberal excuses for American-born blacks.
Now, I'm not going to call them blacks from the Caribbean because they have actual names that they identify themselves with. And for most of them, it's not black, right? But it's not a problem for the ones of them that do come over here because they are culturally prepared to succeed in the educational system that we have set up over here. All they need is an opportunity and a chance. And so a lot of them, they make a conscious effort to have their children not acculturated into the black community because of those values and the practices that come with that, right? And they understand that. And this is a smart thing for them to do if they want to increase the chances of their children succeeding in certain areas of life, right? It's just the matter of the fact, right? But those white liberals, they find ways to make excuses for the blacks so they can still find favor in that community.
If black attorneys are not elevated to partnerships in law firms in proportion to their numbers, then to the New York Times this shows, in the words of their front page headline, law firms are slow in promoting minority lawyers to partner role. Apparently, there can only be external reasons for anything negative that happens to blacks.
Only external because they see blacks as being childlike, right? And children, they always blame other kids for anything bad that happens. And it's not until the children are taught to take responsibility for their own actions that they stop doing most of that blaming. But blacks having no power to take responsibility for their actions and circumstances, that's lumped into being a black person, right? And that's one of the reasons that you have to get out of there, right? And you have to become something else.
According to Andrew Hacker, the fact that white taxi drivers often pass up black males seeking a ride, especially at night, shows these drivers to be patently racist, even though black taxi drivers do the same, in order to avoid becoming victims of crime.
You see that? They'll avoid that so they can keep that narrative going.
White liberals long denied that there were higher crime rates among blacks by pointing to the imperfections of crime statistics in general, or more specifically, claiming that blacks are simply arrested more often for things that whites would not be arrested for. But if the imperfections of crime statistics were the real problem, then discussions could be limited to murder statistics, since dead bodies are not ignored, whether they are black or white, and neither are murderers, whatever their race. But murder statistics show the same disproportionate number of crimes by blacks as other statistics do.
Blacks do a whole lot more killing than anyone else in the country per ratio. And what else do? They glorify it, right? It's like a badge of honor and a sign of respect in much of the black culture to kill and commit crimes, right? And they show no signs of stopping or slowing down anytime soon, right? And so we can see this in all the cities in the United States of America that have a substantial portion of people who call themselves black people, right? And it doesn't matter where we want to go, right? Chicago, Atlanta, Vegas, Memphis, St. Louis, and even all the way in Alaska, where you wouldn't think it would happen at, right? And you have to let those be the black people, right? And let them keep that black culture. And you have to remove yourself and your children from being tied to that identity.
While murder statistics might provide more accuracy, they would not provide white liberals with a means of evading the obvious. Riots by blacks are almost automatically blamed on whites, whether in the Kerner report on the riots of the 1960s or in the reactions among white liberals to the Los Angeles riots of 1992. In some white liberal circles, the New York Times, for example, the police are almost automatically at fault in confrontations with black criminals, hoodlums, or rioters. When the police arrive on a scene of crime or violence in black communities, whatever they do is likely to be categorized later as either having let the situation get out of hand or as having used excessive force.
And the violent blacks in those communities, they start turning into victims real quick, right? And saying how they didn't do anything and how the police are just over there bothering them for no apparent reason. And one thing that we all know is that the blacks in those communities, they can get wild. And when you have people painting this type of narrative, then they're in a no-win situation, the police.
Any force sufficient to prevent the situation from getting out of hand is almost certain to be called excessive force by white liberals in the media, so that by definition, the police will have acted badly, no matter what they did or failed to do.
Now, to be honest, sometimes the police do get way out of hand and they overstep their boundaries. And this is unacceptable, right? But there's other times that they're actually using the necessary force to deal with some of those wild people. And so I remember when I was about 20 years old and I took a job doing night security for this shopping center. And this was on the southeast side of Vegas near Maryland Parkway and Tropicana. And so every night, the black teens and the black youth, they would come across the street from these apartments right here, and they would be belligerent and they would act a straight fool, right? And you could talk to them nice and you can be polite, and that still didn't matter because they were going to be defiant no matter what. And so I had friends that were like this also, so I understood, and it was no surprise to me. But I can see how when the police come across people like this, I see why in some cases they have to be more aggressive, because a lot of the times that's the only way that you can get this situation under control, right? But the white liberals who have never interacted with these type of people and in these type of situations and settings, they're speaking from no experience. All they're doing is just pushing a narrative.
Should the police arrive in such overwhelming numbers as to bring the disorder to a quick halt without any need to use force at all, then they will often be said to have overreacted by sending so many cops to deal with unresisting people. One of the reactions of the people to such predictable scapegoating in the media has been to depolice some of the most violent black neighborhoods, looking the other way rather than risk seeing a whole career ruined by media charges of racism.
And so my reaction to people saying depolice is this. Okay, let's depolice the black community, and then what I want you to do is I want you to sell your house, I want you to take your family and your kids, and I want you to move into one of those depoliced black neighborhoods that you're vouching so hard and heavy for. And then let's see how that works out for you, right? You see, it's always the people who don't live in those neighborhoods or who have never lived in those type of neighborhoods who come up with these grand ideas, right? And so these are people who live or either have grown up somewhere that's way out there in the suburbs somewhere, right? Where the problems out there are completely different, right? But it's these type of people that have these narratives that you have to be very skeptical of, because these are the ones that are going to prevent you from climbing out of the pit and entering into the free world where life is much better and it makes more sense. All right. And so I want to thank you for watching all the way into the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.